Good evening and welcome to the Dead Earth podcast. The Earth died long ago, and at first only a few of us realized. This is the future that awaits us all. This week's story is Mellified Manny. When my family first moved into the apartment complex, I was only 12 years old and I still wore skirts. I unironically skipped and I bellowed when I laughed. I often had scrapes on my knees and a white and gold honey lollipop, the kind my dad always picked up for me, in my mouth.
You know, I was told this was a place to watch for birds, but I never thought I'd see a honeysucker this early in the year,
he said as an introduction. He was corpulent, hairless, and wore maroon shades which matched his maroon shorts. He wore a sweaty, bleach-stained t-shirt that was a particularly blinding shade of yellow. His high-pitched voice rasped when he spoke. He didn't look to be much over 30.
You like sweets, do ya?
I kept the candy firmly in my mouth, falling back on the attentive silence children are allowed in conversation with adults.
Why, I bet, everyone does, huh?
The wind blew my hair in front of my face and I didn't adjust it. He clapped a meaty mitt to his thigh and giggled nervously.
You know, honey's a cure-all. Yes, that's true. Nature's miracle. You can create little honey traps to keep diseased vermin away. And, it runs right through the body and collects all the undesirable bits along with it. Gets them right on out of there. Now, what's your name?
Meadow, I said around the edges of my treat.
Why, hello there, Miss Meadow. I'm Manny.
I smiled politely before running off. The next day, I spied from my balcony Manny sitting on that same bench, sweating under the afternoon sun with a white and gold honey lollipop protruding from his mouth. He seemed to be waiting for somebody, I thought, though at the time, I didn't know who. Summers came and went, and I grew, and so did Manny. He would sit out there damn near every day the sun shone, and he was a constant deterrent for my enjoyment of the courtyard we supposedly shared. My childhood sickness returned when I was 14, and just before freshman year, my mother brought me wig shopping for the first time. My long red wig was upsetting to Manny, and he told me as much every time he saw me. "Why did you shave off that pretty black hair, Meadow?" he would ask, a honey treat in his fist. I would shrug and hurry on, trying not to make eye contact. Eventually, my father stalked outside and explained my illness quite coldly to Manny, and after that, Manny shut up about my hair. That's when the bags started appearing. Our apartment complex was set back from the main road a quarter mile or so, with a thick forest blocking any view of traffic and affording us more privacy than most this close to the city. That forest was a stomping ground for the elementary and middle school children. Then, someone started hanging bags roped together from the branches of the tallest trees. The plastic shopping bags were tied off and filled with a yellow liquid. Some of them resembled caterpillars with their many yellow segments sagging down, but most were 3 segments long, and the top bag always had a face drawn on it in Sharpie. The kids insisted they were full of pee, but I knew better, though I'm not sure I ever said it out loud. Jared, a 6th grader at the time, swore he once saw one way up in the heart of the woods wearing a black wig. I'm unsure of the order of the events that comes next, but as close as I can remember, Manny began having noise complaints called on his place every so often around now. The walls were paper thin as it was, and his wailing started a rumor that he had adopted an infant. The rumor wasn't true, of course, but the wailing continued. We lived several units over, and my mother says he woke her up from a deep sleep more than once. When I returned home from a particularly extended stay in the hospital, my father found a pyramid of honey bear bottles stacked outside our front door. There was no message along with the supposed gift. I had not eaten a honey lollipop in years. I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to Manny. And Manny began to swell in size around this time, appearing at his post in the courtyard with jars of his favorite snack, ladling dollops directly into his mouth with a honey dipper. He would sweat profusely under the heat of the sun, and I would imagine him as a slug, leaving a trail of slime from his bench up the stairs into his hovel. In fact, on the rare event that Manny was not sitting out there, looking around hurriedly for the child I once was, the other tenants of our complex would refuse to go anywhere near his wretched bench. The wood began to smell like him, sickly sweet slop. Time passed and I recovered. Sophomore and junior years went without incident, relating to my sickness as well as Manny's presence around my home. My black hair grew back. But the summer before my senior year, I grew more ill than ever before. And Manny took notice. We spoke one last time. It was in the hazy light of my unit. I was walking alone late after work from the carport to the front door.
It's necessary that you come to my apartment on your 18th birthday, Meadow. It's vital.
He spoke slowly. His speech slurred. I looked him in the eye, furious, tired, exhausted by his attention. I was not scared of him. I was revolted. His eyes swam lazily in their sockets, and his mouth hung open when he wasn't speaking.
I just think that, you should be sure to have some of my honey.
He was missing many of his teeth. When had that happened?
I just think that, you need to try everything you can to, stay healthy.
He was crying. His tears seemed thick, viscous. They stuck and clung to his cheeks, not quite completing their descent. I noticed an orange-green film around his tear ducts, around his nostrils, his ears.
Will you promise me?
He shouted this at me, and I nodded reflexively. Even though he did not look directly at me, this response soothed him, and he stumbled back toward his unit. I wasn't home on my 18th birthday, and I never told my parents about that final encounter with our neighbor. My mother eventually told me the story, fourth hand, which she had heard from a nurse in my room, who had been told by a detective, who was relayed the tale by the responding officer. The night of my birthday, a noise complaint was called in because Manny was, quote, screaming again. "Come on in, Meadow. Door's unlocked," read a hastily scrawled, barely legible poster board taped to the front door of his apartment. Upon opening the door, dozens of birthday balloons thrust themselves into the hallway. The officer had remarked the place smelled like stale cheese and feces. There was a chocolate cake covered in a layer of wax from candles burned all the way down, and a plastic shopping bag containing a gift receipt and a play wig fitted for a young child. And jar upon jar of Manny's favorite golden essence. His skin had sloughed off when they tried to remove him from his honey immersion in the bathtub, and the toilet was completely ruined, plugged up with a golden green slop. Weeks later, I returned home, just barely well enough to earn a weekend's reprieve from the dull gray tomb the hospital had come to represent for me. I found a sticky slip of paper pinned beneath my car's windshield wiper. A crude map had been penned, leading from my front door and down into the woods. I hastily folded the sheet and slipped it into my pocket, not wanting to add another distressing detail to my mother's conscience about this whole ordeal. And that night, I slipped out the front door when everyone was asleep and used the flashlight on my phone as I stumbled through the woods, hidden within the split knot of a tree was a jar of golden green honey. I'm not sure why I ate the entire jar over the next 2 weeks. Whether Manny's demise had made me feel sorry for him, or at least less suspicious, or whether I was willing to try anything to get out of that hospital room at this point. But I made a full recovery within the month and haven't had as much as the flu since.
The Dead Earth podcast is created by Emily Lyles, Taylor Normington, John Reeder, and Dan Wallace. All stories are crafted by Taylor Normington. Mellified Manny was performed by Deja Vanover and Goss. Our logo artwork and this week's episodic artwork is designed by Chloe Burns. You can find more of our work on Instagram at Tiny Moon Studios. Our website is deadearthpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.